What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another live stream here on Met Central. And of course, because after we do a podcast, the news breaks very late at night as the New York Mets have brought back Manaea on a 3-year deal for $75 million, coming out to a $25 million AAV. There are deferrals allegedly in the deal, which we'll talk about that if we get more details, of course. But the New York Mets add to their rotation like we thought. And obviously they're done with the offseason now because there's only like 2 more months, so obviously they're done with the offseason according to Mets Twitter. But all jokes aside, yeah, they bring back Manaea. Very happy about that. And they miss out on Jock Peterson, which sucks because there was a report recently from John Heyman about how they were interested there. So we're going to talk about all that stuff and more. Before we jump into everything, please be sure to leave a like on the live stream on your way in. Subscribe if you guys are new to the channel, especially if you're Met fans, and turn on your notifications so you know when we upload or go live. This feels chaotic to me because I was the one night I go to sleep early and then I wake up at like 7 a.m. and or sort of wake up, but I was like half asleep still. I check my phone because I just had this weird itch to check my phone. And then I just see it in our group chat, Manaea signed, and I look through Twitter, just try to look at the details more and more of the contract, and I'm like, oh, all right, he signed. And then now we're here. So a little chaotic. I'm still like half asleep sitting in this chair right now. But yeah, overall, your initial thoughts before we dive into the contract and everything that he did, obviously, this past season.
Yeah, I love this contract personally. I thought 3 years, that's perfect amount of years. I thought like I remember like a couple podcasts we did before the offseason like officially got underway and we were talking about who from the team last year is going to come back who was a free agent and we talked about Manaea. I thought he would come back, but I thought it would only be if it was a 3-4 year deal. And there was a part of me that thought it wasn't going to happen just because I thought, he had a good year and I thought some team on the on free agency would just go out there, give him the 5 years and overpay. And I thought 4 years I'd be hesitant, but I'd be fine with. But 3 years, it's a no-brainer and a very fair AAV. I mean, they gave him the qualifying offer at 21 million. He obviously rejected that. And 25 million AAV, that's only a $4 million increase. So the AAV is fair for me. I love the 3 years. I think overall it's a really good deal. And it's the same type of deal that the Texas Rangers gave Nathan Eovaldi.
Yeah, and looking at the way the pitching market is shaped up, and everyone's like, oh, terrible contracts, low Mets, because that's just, of course, the way things go here. But I really do love this deal because of what you said, and that's why I used the word steal on Twitter when I was describing this contract, because I felt that this was a steal considering the price point that we thought he was going to sign at, and considering the 3 years. It's really the 3 years for me that sold me on, okay, this is a steal, because there were talks that maybe he was going to get 4 to 5 years. And if that was going to be the case, then I would have looked in a different direction. But the fact that you were able to get him at the 3 year mark, because he is still up there in age at the end of the day, and despite the adjustments he made, there are concerns there, of course, with that, and the fact that there were injuries prior to the season. But yeah, at 32 years old, now you have him until he is 35. Although I don't know if he's going to be 33 come opening day. So 35, 36, around that range. Nonetheless, it is still a really, really good deal considering what you got from him this past season, of course. Just to, really give you an idea of how good he was last season, especially in the second half. I mean, he was one of the leaders in terms of pitching WAR. I mean, top 25 we're talking about in pitching WAR this past season. When you look at the second half numbers and when you look at his numbers in general, the 3.47 ERA, if you're looking at the baseline, over the course of a little under 182 innings, making 32 starts, which was insane to even think about, because we were talking about potentially that he was going to make less starts than we thought, and maybe have to go to the bullpen at points during the season, just because that's been the nature of Manaea. 3.83 FIP, a 1.08 WHIP, and then a walks per nine of 3.1, a home runs per nine flat at 1, and a strikeouts per nine, which obviously increased as the season went along at 9.1, because once he changed that arm angle, I mean, we were talking about a completely different pitcher when it comes to Sean Manaea, and I really want to get like the numbers post All-Star break, especially with him, because it was just insane what you were getting from him. Just a completely different pitcher, and he finished top 11, I believe, in Cy Young voting as well because of how good he was performing. So to me, this was a no-brainer. You look at what Walker Buehler just got a few minutes ago with the Boston Red Sox too, where that was at the 21 million mark. To me, I am easily giving a little bit extra money and the 2 extra years to Sean Manaea before signing Walker Buehler, who still has a lot more to prove. And I get that there's upside there with Bueller that he could be an ace, but considering what, like you said, Evaldi got, considering what Bueller just got, considering what all these pitchers are signed for, Kikuchi got, what was it, 3 years also, right?
Yeah.
This is just what it is. And I am more than happy and content with the fact that this is the price point. And I still believe personally, and I can be totally off base with this, that, well, one, this is confirmed pretty much that it's what you said all along and what we thought, that this doesn't take them out on Sasaki. Like, Sasaki is just a bonus. So if they get Sasaki, this rotation's shaping up to be Senga, Manaea, Sasaki, because I don't know if they're going to throw Sasaki in the ace spot right away. And then you have Montas and Holmes, and then Peterson still as a six-man. That is a really good six-man rotation. Like, that is one that you could be very happy about and content with going into the season, at least in my opinion. So, if like, I'm tired of hearing, well, the rotation sucks. And I still believe personally, and this could be totally off base in general, but if there's a world where by some chance they land Sasaki and come February, let's just pretend here and say Corbin Burns is still available. What if they find a way to get Corbin Burns on like a 1 or 2 year deal, plus adding Sasaki, plus bringing back Manaea? Then this rotation, Burns, Senga, Manaea, Sasaki, and then you still have Peterson, Montas, Holmes. I mean, that rotation is one of the best in baseball then at that point. And again, we have to see if it could get to that point. But either way, if this is the rotation come opening day, I'm still more than content with it. But if there is a world where they could add to it still, I'm the last guy complaining. But I think they put themselves in a spot where they could play the market cautiously, where we're not going to give in to a price we don't like because we're content with what we have. But if something falls into our lap, we're going to jump on the opportunity.
Yeah, and basically that's what happened with Sean Manaea because I feel like if this deal was gonna go 4 years, 5 years, I feel like they would have passed, but 3 years, it was perfect for them. Probably we're gonna see the same thing that's gonna happen with Pete, where if some team offers him a long-term deal, they'll pass, but if it's a short-term deal, 3, 4 years, they'll probably jump all over and bring him back. But even just to jump back on the AAV point, like, I was surprised because and we were talking about this before in our group chat before, but if at least me and you had a feeling that if it was gonna go 3 years, we thought at least the AAV would have to be a bit more, maybe around the 30 million mark. But the fact that it was only $25 million, and like I said, only a 4 million increase from the qualifying offer, I think it just showed. And again, and it showed from the comments that he made after Game 6 of the NLCS, where Manaea wanted to come back here, and it showed because I think he gave the Mets a little bit of a hometown discount with the fact that he helped that they helped him out last year with the adjustment he made to the arm slot and the fact that he looked like a more dominant pitcher. So yeah, I mean, the more and more I think about this deal, the more and more I'm even liking it now. And I loved it originally, but yeah, it's just a great all around. And I know there were a little bit concerns last year, especially towards the end of the season. Especially you saw it in Game 6 where Manaea kind of ran out of gas, but I wouldn't be too concerned just because the year before he was in and out of the bullpen with the Giants. He only pitched us 117 and two-thirds innings. Last year he jumped from 181 to two-thirds innings, so a really big jump. And now you factor in that the Mets are going to run a six-man rotation, which should give him more rest throughout the year, which I'm sure you're going to see a much more fresher and a much more, relaxed Manaea as we go down the stretch because at least I do hope and I do expect that this team is going to be making a deep playoff push this year. But I mean, yeah, in terms of the rotation right now, I'm I'm okay with it. I still don't love it. and that's mainly the fact that I don't like Peterson as the number 3 starter going into it. I would much rather him be the 4 starter, but yeah, I mean, like I said, they're in a very good position now to land Sasaki, and I think they did this the smart way in terms of not just overweighting, because if you were just gonna wait on Sasaki, I don't think that would have been the smart thing, just because I don't see the Mets right now as the favorite. Like I mentioned on the podcast, I still think the Dodgers and the Padres are the 2 favorite teams to land them. So there was no reason to wait on Sasaki because, like I said, if you miss out on him, then and like Manaea goes off the board, Burns goes off the board. Now you're in a tough spot where, okay, where do you pivot to on the starting pitcher market? Because then you then have to probably overpay for a guy, or if you wanted to go to the trade market, teams going to see that you're desperate and they're going to demand a little more from you in terms of prospect wise. So I think the timing of this was right. Now, if they can get Sasaki, which Stearns all along has said that if they do get him, it's a bonus. But yeah, if they get Sasaki and then have a 6-man rotation of Senga, Manaea, Sasaki, Peterson, Holmes, and Montas, I think that's would be a very good 6-man rotation.
I agree that my preference would be to still add one more guy just because of the fact that we're still talking about, potentially a game 4 start being Frankie Montas, which isn't a terrible position to be in, but you still would maybe like a little bit more there. But I agree with you on the hometown discount thing. I really do feel like this was that sort of deal here because I mean, we were talking about him getting an additional year or two and getting like maybe 30 million or just under 30 million AAV. And this is what we talked about too with bringing in Stearns at the helm. You develop a culture where players want to be here, especially pitchers, because when you have a pitching lab as good as this team does now, you're seeing a lot more guys sign here because all the minor league moves we talked about yesterday, we're talking like Dodger-esque moves where guys want to come here to try and fix themselves because they see what happened with Severino Manaea this past year. They look at what Reed Garrett became out of nowhere last year or what Denel Nunez did last season. Granted, he was on his way up anyway, but still, like, he was able to elevate to another level and they gave him an opportunity. There's so much opportunity with this organization and with the pitching lab that guys want to be here now. And that's where the Mets found themselves. And I think that really what it comes down to with this Manaea contract, where this has a chance to be a bargain, is if you get what you did in the second half from him for a full season, which that would be ace level stuff. I don't know if it's going to happen. But if you get what you got from him last year throughout the years, I would say fair value, like completely fair value for what the pitching market is. And with the point you made of the postseason and him running out of gas, yeah, I'm not too worried because the more volume and the more innings he's going to throw, because you got to think that this is, or you at least hope that this will be a consistent thing and there's not going to be, um, I don't even want to say the I word, but you want to hope that there's not going to be concerns that come up throughout this contract. But if all things go right, this has a chance to be, I think at worst, just we're looking at it like, all right, fair value. And then at best, we're looking at it like, oh, wow, he did he put up ace caliber numbers throughout a full season. That is a steal of a contract.
Yeah, no, it's a steal of a contract, and like just what you mentioned with the culture change. I mean, it's big because even like a couple weeks ago when Frankie Montas did his press conference when the Mets announced his signing officially, and he talked about how he talked with Manaea about how the Mets pitching lab improved them and how the culture was much better here, and that probably swayed Montas to come here, and now him and Manaea, who are ex teammates of the Oakland A's, now they're gonna be pitching together in Queens at Citi Field. So yeah, I mean, it's really nice, and I also think another factor. I think this helps out Brandon Sproat a lot. Now that I'm thinking about it, because if the Mets didn't add a guy like Manaea and they went into the season with this type of rotation, then I think there would have been a lot more pressure on Sproat to come up here as soon as possible, and then to just throw him in the rotation and be like a number 2 starter. But now that, you bring back Manaea, now that I think if Sproat eventually does come up here, which we do hope, now he could kind of slot in as that number 3, number 4 starter where he doesn't have a lot of pressure on him. He could just come in here, get adjusted, get used to the major league, and then, develop from there. So, yeah.
I agree because I you don't want what happened with Scott last year to happen to Sproat, where because with the season, with the way the rotation shaped up last year, once Senga went down, it was like, all right, well, let's just wait on Christian Scott and hope that Scott will come up soon and save the season. And I would argue, if anything, I would love it if they could find a way to, like we said, if they add another starter and Sproat's pushing his way to the majors, I would love to see him in the bullpen. And I know that people are gonna argue, well, you want to see him, throw more innings just because at some point you're gonna want to use him as a starter. But I keep going back to the way Burns and Woodruff were developed in Milwaukee, where they came up as relievers, they were getting high leverage outs, getting quality outs there from the bullpen, and it really helped them take a step forward into the rotation. And I think that it wouldn't be the worst thing where, if Sproat's pushing his way to the majors, you add a high leverage arm there basically, because with the stuff that he has, he could get premier outs. And you're not burning his arm early on too, because that's another thing that really I want the Mets to be smarter about with their prospects, especially as we saw with Syndergaard and, Matz, Harvey, all these guys where they used all their bullets so early in their career. And by the time they got into their late 20s, it was just, they were beyond cooked. And you saw the injury concerns really arise with those guys. So I'd like to avoid that with Sproat, where they manage his innings better and they manage him coming up through the majors, where, okay, we use him in the bullpen first to really maximize his bullets there. And then once we don't have as much for the rotation and we really need to get more innings there, we could just move Brandon Sproat into the rotation because he's a young arm, a fresh arm, and we're going to get a lot more volume from him. I think that should be the way that they go about it with Sproat, but it might not be. Maybe they do view him as, all right, we're only going to put him in the rotation. And the only thing that still could change that entirely, even if they add a starter, is if Holmes flops entirely, because then you have to move Holmes back to the bullpen, and it's either going to be Blackburn or one of those guys, or McGill, Budo coming back into the rotation, or maybe it is Sproat that just comes up. So that's the only thing that could change that conversation. But this pitching staff is really shaped up nicely. And again, we talked about it yesterday. People are not going to like it. Fans aren't going to want to hear it. I think they're in a spot where they're only going to add like one bullpen or maybe two, because they have so many of these guys that could be starters or, be in the bullpen. And I think it's clear as day that they view some of these starters as bullpen candidates by continuing to add to the rotation. I think this makes it even safer to bet that Griffin Canning is viewed as a bullpen option, because if they're still pursuing Sasaki, or they still might get Burns as he, his market dwindles, maybe they do actually view Griffin Canning as a bullpen piece, and that's another weapon there. And that's why I keep saying they're going to add 1 to 2 relievers, and fans won't love it, but that's going to be the case.
Yeah, it's gonna be 1 to 2 relievers, and it's gonna be like we've been continuing to talk about. It's gonna be on the cheaper side because, again, it's not the new type of philosophy where it's smart to go out there and overpay for relievers, because as we've seen relievers from year to year, they can be weird. They could be dominant one year, and then they could be very shaky the next year, and they could be potentially out of the league. But yeah, it's like what we mentioned. This is why we brought Stearns over here. This is why we brought the pitching lab here, because we want to be one of those smarter organizations like the Dodgers, like the Braves, where they can identify a pitcher out there who's struggling, but they can see some qualities in there, put him in that pitching lab, give him a couple weeks, and then boom, you're getting top quality innings and high leverage innings out of those guys. I mean, like, look at the Dodgers this year with what they did with Michael Kopech at the trade deadline. Michael Kopech was an absolute tire fire in the White Sox. He comes over to the Dodgers as a flamethrower, and he's one of their most valuable relievers in the postseason and down the stretch. So, yeah, they're gonna add 1 or 2 relievers now because I think they're pretty much done with the rotation unless they, Sasaki comes here because I don't think they're gonna add another guy in free agency or through trade, unless unless what you mentioned, like Corbin Burns' market just absolutely falls apart and he comes here on a 1, 2 year deal. Other than that, I don't see it. I think now they'll turn their attention to the offense in terms of Pete and then a potential DH they could add. And yeah, the bullpen arms will just see some random type of guys that Stearns identifies or possibly like what we've been talking about if they decide to bring back Stanek on a cheap deal.
Yeah, I would really love Stanek back the most out of anyone. I still think like I would be very happy if it just Stanek Rayleigh. And because Rayleigh's not going to be ready for opening day, probably. He's probably going to need until May or June. But I think that, you bring those two back and the bullpen shaped up well. The rotation is shaped up well. I really like where this is going. And like you mentioned with the whole thing of uh, the Dodgers, they bring in Tyler Anderson when nobody thought he would be good, and they find value there. Andrew Heaney, they got value out of. So that's what you want to be. But I do want to address comments here. Sign Pete, sign Winker, left-handed DH, sign 2 bullpen arms. McCutcheon back to the Pirates. Yeah, I saw that, which could care less really about that as an option for the Mets. And McCutcheon, I expect him to stay anyway. Which there is that interesting report too that Ramsey put out on Twitter that on ESPN apparently they were talking about adding another outfielder or two, whether it's the trade market, whether it's the free agent market, which obviously became more evident when we saw that Jock Peterson did not land with the Mets and the Mets were targeting him, which really sucks because I've been asking for him. Carson's been asking for him for years now, and it's like every single time he just ends up staying more towards the West Coast. I think at this point it's just a preference thing of being closer to the West Coast than being on the East Coast. And it just sucks because I really want him. But I think this makes it evident that they're really trying to move Marte, or they're going to try to land an outfielder first. Then they want to move Marte, if possible, to get a couple more arms and get off that contract. And I would be okay with Winker. I'm not sure who else is out there that, there's the trade market talk, which I'd have to, really do a deep dive into guys that are available there. But yeah, and then I want to go to the free agent market as well with the outfield position just to see who is available. I mean, Teoscar, I would freaking love Teoscar if that's possible, but he's a guy that might be looking for a multi-year deal, so I don't think that's really possible unless his market drops, which usually happens to Teoscar every year. Outside of that, I mean, Austin Hayes, because he plays good defense, I could see the Mets maybe pursuing him. Outside of that, the free agent market's kind of weak. It really is. Like, you're looking at Winker coming back, Teoscar, or you're looking at a guy like Austin Hayes. And to me, I would rather just bring Winker back at that point if it's not Teoscar, or I'd rather find someone through the trade market, which I'd have to look at who's available. But what are your thoughts with that sort of deal with the outfield market?
Yeah, it sucks they couldn't land Jock Peterson. I would have loved that as a power DH bet. It is what it is. It just seems that he wants to be closer to the West Coast. And listen, it is what it is. Like, guys have preferences, and that's all right with me. But yeah, the news that they're interested in more outfielders, it just pretty much confirms to me. And we pretty much said it after they landed Juan Soto and Jose Siri that they're going to be shopping Marte. It seems it's a matter of fact that how much of that contract they're going to eat because no team is going to be willing to take on that entire last year the deal with them owing like $22.5 million to Marte. So they'll have to eat some money. And yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly who's going to be available on the trade market, but if they're strictly going to go through free agency, then pretty much it's going to be Winker, and I'd be happy about that because after the trade deadline, through like a pretty much a couple like a rough first month, Winker was absolutely fine. I thought he was a very good bat in the playoffs. Hit a couple nice home runs. But yeah, if they bring back Winker, he becomes the DH, and you bring back Pete on a cheap deal, I think this offense is pretty set, and then it's just the bullpen and Sasaki then at that point to see if they can get that deal wrapped up. But yeah, I mean, as the days goes by, and listen, I told you guys yesterday, Stearns was not sleeping, and it was pretty evident considering that he got that deal wrapped up at 1:44 in the morning. So yeah, exciting signing, and now we push on and see what else got to be done now.
Jonathan's asking about Grichuk, which I wouldn't hate Grichuk as an ad. It just wouldn't be my preference, and I think that the Mets honestly wouldn't view him as a top target. And my only argument, I know I brought up Hayes before and Teoscar, but I think they prefer a left-handed bat just because this outfield's already full of outside of Soto and Nimmo. I'm mostly looking like with Siri and Taylor, the guys that you would probably want to give more of days off. I would think that they would want more of a left-handed bat, but I could be wrong. Maybe they do want a right-handed bat because they view this guy that they're going to add as more of a DH. And if that's the case, I wouldn't love Grichuk as a DH option. I wouldn't buy, like, if they're looking to get a guy that is going to platoon more in the outfield, then fine. But in my opinion, you want to get someone that's a good bat because you want whoever you add to DH, but also has the flexibility to play the outfield so you could give guys a few more days off. So, like, say, you want to get Lindor off his feet for a game, you could put a guy like Teoscar in the outfield for a game and then let Lindor get off his feet, or Nimmo, who, had the injury down the stretch. You could move Nimmo to DH and then have Teoscar play left for a game, and you're at least okay with that. I don't view Grichuk as enough of a power bat to where you could be comfortable with it. I know last year he had a really good year in a smaller sample size, but I still would rather them go after someone that could provide a little bit more power for them. But that's just me.
Yeah, I think for me, like the more I think about it, I think the Winker deal makes sense just because we know that he can't really hit left-handed pitching, so he could be strictly a DH for against right-handed pitching, and then whenever a lefty does come on the mound in terms of starting or out of the bullpen, then you could rotate your DH. So let's say on those days where there's a lefty on the mound, you could put Soto there, you could put Pete there, you could put Lindor there or Nimmo there, and that could just be a nice rotation spot for when guys just need a day off their feet in terms of not playing the field. So yeah, so for me, the more and more I think about it, I think the Winker deal makes a lot of sense for him coming back. And I do wonder how much money he's going to be asking for. I don't think it's going to be too much. Maybe like a $5 million deal, $6 million deal. Like I don't anticipate like anything like much more than that.
Yeah, and when I look at the trade market, it's like the only guy really available that maybe I could see the Mets going after is a guy we talked about earlier in the offseason, Cedric Mullins. Outside of that, there's really not a whole lot out there that I know of. Like, maybe there is a guy that we don't know about at all that is going to end up being available, but I'm not sure. Like, I really don't know uh where else they could go in terms of the outfield spot just with finding a guy, but it's gonna have to be someone with a lot of control. Like, maybe Robert is still in play. Like, that's a guy that could be available potentially, which I would love if they found a way to add Robert. But is it gonna happen? I would argue most likely not. But outside of those two guys, I'm not sure who it could be. I'm really not sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would love Robert. I do wonder what the asking price on him would be, just because he still has I think a year or two of control. Still fairly young. I know he had a down year last year, but I mean the White Sox last year were so bad. It's like you kind of just got to throw that out the window. I still think he has potential, but yeah, I mean if it's Robert on the trade market, I'd be interested. But I do think that it's going to be Winker, and even like to the point like we brought up with Manaea, like Winker at the end of the postseason last year, he made those comments that he wanted to be back here, and like we talked about with the culture change, you want guys that want to be here. You want guys that want to be New York Mets and represent the borough of Queens. So the more of those guys that you find, and just that more of a culture that you grow, that's like we want to play here, we want to win here, that's only going to entice more and more free agents to come here later on down the line. And I mean, like, listen, if the signing of Juan Soto wasn't enough to entice free agents to come here, then building up that culture change, it's also going to be a big part of why future free agents want to be here. Specifically, like a guy who plays first base for the Toronto Blue Jays this year, who's going to be a free agent next year.
Yeah, 100%. And we'll see how the rest of the offseason does shape out because there's still a lot more uncertainty here. And as much as Met fans keep thinking the offseason's over, every time a move happens, the offseason's far from over. And especially as we get further along, that only makes the likelihood of the Mets signing some of these guys go up because that means their markets aren't doing as well as we think. And that only means that the Mets could have an opportunity to jump on some of these guys that we thought maybe they didn't have a chance at, like we keep mentioning all stream here, Corbin Burns, or maybe another bat becomes available that we didn't think, like Teoscar, who I would really love to add because I think if he was the DH next year, this lineup would be unbelievable. I mean, if you're talking about bringing back Pete Alonso and then you're talking about adding Teoscar to this lineup is really, really good 1 through 9, and I think that could be one of the better lineups in baseball, going toe to toe with some of the best teams in baseball. So we'll see where things go. But yeah, do you have any final thoughts to add before we wrap it up?
No, I love the signing. Now let's just go out there. Let's finish this off season. Bring back Pete, DH, and hopefully Sasaki lands here. But a very good move last night. A very good move. Happy all around with it.
100%. So yeah, we'll talk more, of course, throughout the off season. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you haven't already. Don't forget to subscribe. Turn on your notifications so you know when we upload or go live on the channel. And we'll see you guys in the next one.